Hello, and welcome to my home in Pony, Montana. I am coming to you from winter here in Montana land, but I keep a piece of summer alive all year long here in the greenhouse. Today I would like to share some shortcuts for learning how to identify plants and their uses anywhere in the world, which I call the patterns method of plant identification, based on my book, Botany in a Day. For example, some of you may recognize that this flower is a hibiscus. However, knowing the name doesn't reveal anything useful about the plant or its properties, so the name is of little consequence. It is far more important to be able to recognize that this plant is a member of the mallow family. You see, related plants have similar characteristics for identification, and they often have similar uses. Take the mallow family, for example. There are about 1,500 different species of true mallows that all have some core characteristics in common. Big or small, mallows have 5 separate petals, and the stamens are fused together in a column surrounding the pistil in the middle of the flower. If you are new to botanical terms, you can remember that the stamens are the male part of the flower and that they always stay men. The pistil is the female part of the flower, and you can remember that it is a pistil packin' mama. If you can remember that mallows have 5 separate petals, and the stamens are fused together in a column around the pistil, then you can recognize mallow family plants anywhere in the world: Africa, Asia, Europe, Australia, or here in the Americas. And here's the cool thing. Crush a leaf or flower and feel the unique mucilaginous texture. It isn't just damp like water, it's actually slimy. This mucilaginous property comes from a slimy, moist polysaccharide that is found throughout the mallow family, as well as in a number of unrelated plants, such as aloe vera. This mucilaginous quality is especially useful for treating burns and sunburns. The fluid between your body cells is a mucopolysaccharide hydrogel. Polysaccharides help strengthen this hydrogel after damage, so keep an eye out for mallow family plants if you get too much sun. That's the beauty of the patterns method of plant identification. By learning a few simple plant family patterns, you can recognize and utilize plants you encounter, even if you've never seen them before and you don't know their individual names. I was introduced to wild, edible, and medicinal plants through my grandmother when I was a child. We lived in California and then came up to Montana to visit my grandmother, and every day we'd go on walks out in the fields, and we were picking plants, things like peppermint, red clover, blue violets, yarrow, these different herbs, and then bringing them back to the house. My grandmother liked to dry those on racks and then put them in her tea pantry. She had an entire pantry dedicated to wild teas. And she cooked on a wood cook stove, so every day, I mean literally every day, she had a pot of tea on the stove. And so I grew up with that particular influence. And then after she introduced me to some of these plants, I wanted to know, well, what are all the other interesting plants out here? And so we'd bring back flowers on our walks, and then sit down with our picture books and just page through those books to try and key out a plant and identify it by looking at the pictures. And so, once we had the name of a plant, then we could go through and read about it, study up on its uses, and try it. And so with that kind of an approach, I was able to learn many of the key plants here in southwest Montana before I got out of high school. And I thought I knew a lot about plants, but as I later figured out, I just knew a lot of names of plants. It wasn't until a few years later that I'd settled down and started a school, and then had a guest instructor by the name of Robin Klein, a local herbalist, came and taught a class about the medicinal plants here. That was really my first introduction to plant families. Because before that, I'd seen plant family names in my books, but I didn't know how that, why a plant is in this family or that family, or how that information could be useful. But Robin's walk was very interesting, because as we go along, we came across many members of the rose family, for example, and she would point out, well, you know, here's such and such in the rose family. Notice how it has 5 petals and lots of little stamens. And like other members of the rose family, it contains tannins. It is astringent, and astringent tightens tissues, which could be useful, say, to take down swelling or to help close a wound. Or internally, say if you had diarrhea, this is something that can help dry out your system. And so, you know, these astringents tighten up tissues like that. And this just sort of repeated that as we came from plant to plant in the rose family, a similar pattern for identification and some similar uses. Now I found that really interesting, and it made me want to know, well, what are the patterns for identification? What are the patterns for uses for all these other plants out here as well? And so that's what really led to the writing of my book, Botany in a Day. It was a research project to answer some questions for me. However, it turned out that other people had these questions as well, and Botany in a Day has become, you know, a best-selling botany book, and it's used now as a textbook at herbal schools, wilderness survival schools, colleges, even some high schools across our country and around the world. So Botany in a Day covers more than 100 families of plants. That is pretty much everything in the northern latitudes, what I call the frost belt of the country. Any place that has hard freezes in the wintertime. And then when you go south beyond that line, you have those same families, plus some additional families that, from farther south. Now the tutorial in Botany in a Day introduces 8 key plant families, 8 of the biggest plant families in the world that are widespread, easy to identify, and useful, you know, wherever you go. And in addition to putting those in Botany in a Day, I also included them in my children's book called Shanlea's Quest, a botany adventure for kids ages 9 to 99. And after that, I also produced a card game based on the book, so that instead of merely reading about or hearing this information and sort of having it go in one ear and out the other, you can actually play the game and learn these skills at a more of a body level instead of a head level. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to go in reverse. We'll start with the card game and then work our way back to Botany in a Day. Okay, let's do a quick run-through of the 8 families included in Shanlea's Quest, and then we'll play some card games. So the first family I'd like to introduce is the mint family. And the key pattern for the mint family is that the plants have square stalks, opposite leaves, and they're usually aromatic or minty smelling. So they have square stalks and opposite leaves. The leaves come out across from each other like this, instead of alternating like that. And then, as I said, often minty smelling. So square stalks, opposite leaves, square stalks, opposite leaves in each one of these photos. Okay, and the next family we're going to do is the parsley family. Now the key pattern for the parsley family is what we call compound umbels. That umbel is kind of like an umbrella. And so what we have is all of these spokes for the flowers coming out from a central point. And then we call it a compound umbel because at the end of each one of those spokes is another little umbrella or umbel, hey kitty, that so we have the big umbel and then all the little umbels with it. That makes a compound umbel, as you'll see in each of these pictures here. Now, with some families, like say the mint family, most of your mints are, you know, they're mostly aromatic. Some are very mild. Some are don't really have flavor to them, and others are very strong. But the mints are pretty harmless, pretty hard to hurt yourself if you're going out and picking and trying mints. Now the parsley family is another case here. We have some wonderful edible and medicinal plants in the parsley family, but also some of our deadliest plants in North America include water hemlock and poison hemlock. So in this case, knowing the pattern for the parsley family, being able to recognize the compound umbel, it tells you that you can't be messing around with the parsleys. This is a case where you need to know the individual plants to safely use these. And so that's just super helpful, being able to recognize that pattern, recognize the pattern for the parsley family and go, okay, you got to be careful with these guys. Now the next pattern we'll do is the mustard family. And the mustard family, these are four-petaled flowers. These are the four-petaled flowers in the deck here. And the key pattern for the mustards is that we have four petals with 6 stamens, 4 tall, 2 short. The stamens being, of course, the male part of the flower. The stamens always stay men. So 4 petals with 6 stamens, 4 tall and 2 short, gives us our mustard flowers. And so in the deck here, these are the 4-petaled flowers. Now there's more than 3,000 species of mustards around the world, and they're all edible. So with that much information, you could be walking across the middle of Africa, you see some plant you've never seen before in your life, and you go, oh, look at that, 4 petals, 6 stamens, 4 tall, 2 short. That's a mustard. I can eat it. And like the mints, you're going to find that you know, some are really mild, some are really potent, and you're going to, you know, you can try them, see if you like them. If you like them, throw them in your salad. That's the way it works. Okay, and our next family is the pea family. And the pea family has what we call an irregular flower. So you'll notice, going back to our mustard for a moment, that the flower is very symmetrical. This is what we call a regular flower, as opposed to the pea family that's asymmetrical or irregular. And now there's a lot of different irregular flowers in the world, but what makes the pea family pattern, you know, what makes the peas stand out from the others, and they kind of have their own lingo because they're unique. They have a banner petal, 2 wing petals, and then a keel, like the keel of a boat. Now in the story, Shanlea's Quest, Shanlea is paddling around to each of what are called the tree islands to learn about the different flowering plants. And each island is home to a different guardian that she's able to learn some lessons about the plants from. So in the case of the pea guardian, he has put up basically a port there where she parks her canoe. And so there is a big banner and the wings, and then when she paddles her canoe in there, that makes up the keel of the flower. So banner, wings, and keel is the pattern for the pea family. Now you may not be able to make out the individual flower parts in here to see, you know, the banner, wings, and keel in each of these flowers, but that's okay, you don't need to, because there's sort of you develop an intuitive sense of the peas that you get to the point where you just look at it and you go, oh, that's a pea flower. So you don't always have to see the individual parts. But if you do look closely at something like, say, this alfalfa flower here, then you'll see the individual petals here that have banner, wings, and keel. And if you look real close at a head of clover, you'll see that the clover is made up of many pea flowers, and if you look real close at that, you'll see that each individual pea flower has its own banner, wings, and keel. So just to do a quick review here, we have the mint family, square stems and opposite leaves, usually aromatic or minty smelling. The parsley family, compound umbels. We have the mustard family, 4 petals with 6 stamens, 4 tall, 2 short. And we have the pea family, banner, wings, and keel. So let's clean this up and we'll make some room and we'll cover 4 more families. Okay, continuing on, we have the lily family, and the lily family has what at first appears to be 6 petals, but is in actuality 3 sepals and 3 petals that are identical in size and color. So if we step back to our mustard family for just a moment, we had the 4 petals, and if we look behind those petals, there'd be 4 green sepals, 4 little sepals there. And when we're looking at flower parts, we always go in the same order. We go sepals, petals, stamens, pistils. So we start at the outside and work in sepals, petals, stamens, pistil. Now, When we do that with a lily, we find that the first row, that there's two rows here, two overlapping rows. We have the sepals on the outside, 3 sepals, and then 3 petals on the inside. So 3 sepals and 3 petals that are identical in size and color. Historically, the lily family was very large and included from very diverse plants that were not actually that closely related to each other, such as the glacier lily on the one hand and then the death camas on the other. And with the help of genetics work, we've been able to clarify the relationships and split these out into some new and different families. Nevertheless, whether you're working through an old book or working through a new book, you still need to be able to recognize this pattern for the traditional lily family and then go from there in keying something out. So a good pattern to know, and again it was 3 sepals and 3 petals that are identical in size and color. So the next family we're going to cover here is the grass family. And the grasses may not look like flowers. I don't normally think of them as being flowers, but in a botanical sense, grasses are flowers. They have stamens, they have pistils, they have seeds enclosed in an ovary like other flowers do. The difference is that grass is wind pollinated, so the grasses are not investing energy into producing showy petals to attract insects for pollination. In all other aspects, these are considered true flowers. So it's important to understand when you're keying out plants what is and isn't a flower, and go into a lot more depth in that in Botany in a day. Now for our purposes, for the card game here, we have the grasses, and the key pattern here is that the grass family has knees or nodes in the flower stem, these little growth points that make a bump in the middle of the flower stem is the pattern there. Now the next family I'd like to introduce is the rose family, and these are the 5-petaled cards in the deck. So we talked about these briefly earlier, that the roses have 5 petals, little 5-petal flowers with lots of little stamens in them, and that the vegetation tends to be astringent to varying degrees, that it has these tannins that tighten up tissues. So for the purposes of the game, these are the 5-petal flowers. And then the last family I'd like to introduce is the aster family. And if you look at these, it looks like they have a great many petals. But botanically speaking, these are actually 5-petaled flowers. And so if you look real close, you'll see that an aster flower is a composite. That's the key word here, composite flowers. That it's a composite of many small flowers working together to make what looks like a big flower. And each of those is basically a little 5-petaled flower. So if you think about like a sunflower head growing in a garden, you have this big disc surrounded by petals, and in the middle, where all the seeds are produced, you can think of it as like a garden. It's kind of a garden where all the little flowers are planted, because each seed in that head is produced by an individual flower. So that's really a key characteristic of the aster family, is that you have this pitted disc, big or small, where all the little flowers are planted. So you have disc flowers in the middle, and then the big petal-like things on the outside are what we call ray flowers, that each one of those long petal-like things is actually a flower in itself, with all the petals fused together and flopped over to one side. So you have disc flowers in the middle, ray flowers on the outside, and each of these, disc flowers in the middle, ray flowers on the outside, and you can almost see the details a little bit in the disc flower here. Disc flowers and ray flowers, again, all the way through. And here you can see we have sort of a cone shape, but otherwise the same principle, disc flowers and ray flowers. Now we move on to our dandelion, and you'll see that we have all ray flowers and no disc flowers, whereas then our thistle has all disc flowers but no ray flowers. And these are all what we call composite flowers. Okay, so let's do a quick review of these 4 families. We have the lily family, 3 sepals and 3 petals, that are identical in size and color. We have the grass family. They have the knee-like nodes in the flower stems. We have the rose family. These have the 5 petals with lots of little stamens in the middle. And then we have the aster family with the composite flowers. Now let's shuffle all these together and we'll do a quick review. Okay, so what we'll do is flip the card up and then just need to name the family and see if you can keep up. Lily family, pea family, grass family, mustard, parsley, grass, parsley, rose, mint, pea, mint. So what we're trying to do is to get these family patterns down to a gut level instinct, so you don't have to think about it. You could just be walking down the sidewalk and you see some flowers and you go, oh, aster family, mint family, parsley family, rose family. Now it doesn't matter whether you're in the city looking at flower beds or gardens, or you're out in the wilderness, or you're just looking at pictures in a calendar. You want to be able to get these core families down to the point where it's just instinct and you look at it and you know what family it is. Pea, aster, parsley, grass, pea, aster, lily, mustard, aster, mint, rose, aster, mustard, aster, lily, mint, lily, mustard. Okay, so I'm joined by my friend Lydia, who is a student in our Green University program, and we'll play some card games so you can see how this works. The first one that we're going to do is called Memory or Concentration, and so the object here is to find cards, matching cards from within one family. So what we'll do is lift up the cards. We've got the pea family and the mustard family, no match. Go ahead.
So pea and a pea.
Very nice. Okay, so you get to go again.
Parsley and a rose.
Parsley and rose. Lily, mustard.
Lily and lily.
Nice. Still your turn.
That's right. Rose and mustard.
Okay. Mint and mint. Mint, aster.
Rose.
Good.
Let's see. Aster. Aster.
Clean them out.
Aster. Mustard.
Okay, mint, mint, mustard, oh, mustard, mustard, mustard. Ha.
I'm sorry.
Parsley, parsley. Oh, I was lucky. Pea, parsley.
Rose and rose.
Very good. Okay, so once you've got the basics down to identify the plant families, then you can pick up the pace a little bit and play what we call slap flower. Alrighty, so let's start out with, let's go for Rose family. family.
Lily.
Okay, parsley. Nice.
Aster.
Okay. Grass. Nice.
Rose. Oh man.
Studying plant family patterns, as we have done so far, is an excellent way to get started in plant identification. And the more plant family patterns that you know, the more likely you are to recognize a new specimen when you encounter it in the field. However, there will always be new plants from new families that you haven't yet learned. So it is also important to learn how to key out a plant to identify it. And the first step in keying out any flowering plant is to be able to determine whether it is a monocotyledon or a dicotyledon. So I'll introduce monocots and dicots now, and then we'll include the monocot and dicot cards in the deck, and we'll play some more card games. Let's start with some definitions. First we have monocotyledons. Mono means one, cotyl means seed, and don means leaf. So we have one seed leaf versus dicotyledons that have two seed leaves. Perhaps you remember back in grade school soaking bean seeds between layers of wet paper towels to make them sprout. The beans would soak up water, and the beans themselves would unfold to make a plant, with each half of the bean becoming a seed leaf. So beans are dicots that have two seed leaves, as opposed to something like corn or wheat that unfurls a single seed leaf from the seed. Now fortunately, when you're trying to identify a plant, you do not need to take the seeds, bring them home, and put them in a pot and water them to see whether they have one seed leaf or two seed leaves. I think of it as being kind of like a genetic algorithm that leaves a story through the plant the rest of its life, so you can look at the adult plants to see whether or not it is a monocot or a dicot. So let's look around the greenhouse and compare the differences between monocots and dicots. So the first big clue to distinguish between monocots and dicots is that monocots tend to have parallel veins in the leaves, such as this amaryllis here, where all the veins are running in straight lines down the leaf like that. As opposed to dicots, like this avocado, that tend to have net-veined leaves, that the veins branch out within the leaf. Now that's a pretty good pattern, although it's probably only about 70% accurate, because there are some monocots that appear to have net-veined leaves, and there are also some dicots that appear to have parallel veins. So what we need to do is to start with that and to look for some additional clues to be sure whether a plant is a monocot or a dicot. Another key difference between monocots and dicots is that monocots tend to have flower parts in multiples of 3, while dicots tend to have flower parts in multiples of 4 and 5. Take this wandering Jew from the spiderwort family. It is an obvious monocot with parallel veins in the leaves and flower parts in 3s. In this case we have 3 sepals, 3 petals, and 6 stamens. Compare that to a geranium that has net-veined leaves and flower parts typically in 5s. So in this case we have 5 sepals, 5 petals, and 5, 10, or 15 stamens. Now there are exceptions to that as a result of plant breeding, that the stamens and petals are closely related genetic material, and so plant breeders often breed stamens into petals to make flowers that have additional petals, And so in cultivated flowers, you'll often see exceptions that have, in this case, 5 sepals and quite a few extra petals. There's one more key difference between monocots and dicots. Monocots tend to be more simple plants with a simple branching structure, whereas dicots can have a more complicated branching structure. For example, these chives are an obvious monocot with parallel veins in the leaves, and they're pretty simple plants. As opposed to this tomato that has net veined leaves and a pretty complicated branching structure. And back here we have a little banana plant that is a monocot, and we have over here the avocado, which has the more complicated branching structure of a dicot. So let's take a look around and see what else we have for monocots and dicots. So here we have an aloe vera with parallel veins in the leaves. That's a monocot. And climbing up the wall we have our hibiscus with its net veined leaves and flower parts in 5s. That's a dicot. And up over here we have a grapevine that also has net veined leaves. This is another dicot. And right behind me we have a guava and a bougainvillea. These also have net veined leaves, and these are additional dicots. So let's do this. Let's put our monocot and dicot cards into the deck, and then we'll play some more card games. Now in the card game, the lilies and grasses are monocots, and all of the other families are dicots. And the game that we're going to play now is called Crazy Flowers, which is kind of like Crazy Eights or Uno. So the object of the game is to play out all of these cards, and our opening suit is the aster family. Do you have any asters?
I do.
I do not have any asters. I'm going to change it to the pea family.
I don't have a P.
Pea there.
Did the monocots?
Any monocot family, so it'd be lilies or grasses. I have lilies. And you are poisoning the pile, so if you use a poison card, you can play any card from any family to reset.
Parsley.
Parsley. I don't have any parsley, so I'll play my dicot card, which means you get to play any dicot family. Mint family.
Monocots.
Any monocot. Lily. I'll poison the pile and switch it over to the pea family. Any monocot. Very nice. Okay, the next game that we're going to play is called Shanlea's Harvest, based on the story in the book. Shanlea paddles around to each of the tree islands to learn about the different families of plants and their properties. And so we'll start out with 8 cards for each of the 8 families. And Shanlea needs to come back to win with 1 non-poisonous card from each family that isn't one of that's one of the photo cards and not one of the black and white family cards. So on your turn, you draw and discard every time. So you can draw from this pile, or you could draw the top card off of the discard pile, or you could reach blindly over and take a card and then discard back, or you could use a black and white card, like say I have the Aster family card. I could say, do you have any members of the aster family, in which case you would give one to me, and I would discard something back to you. Okay, so I see a mint in the discard pile. That helps my hand. I'll take that one. And I will discard an aster. Would like to draw a card from your hand? I will take that one. Okay.
So now I have one less card than you do. So.
Yeah, so now I discard back to you. Now these poison cards, if I had drawn a poison card from you, that would have poisoned my whole hand, and I would have to yeah.
Deal.
But it won't hurt you on a discard. You just have to get rid of that before you can
Turn on
turn on your cards. Yep.
Gotcha. Right now.
Okay.
I have them all to the prime now right now. I'll wait until after you come.
Go ahead.
Lily, mint, grass, mustard, aster, rose, parsley, pea.
Awesome. Okay, we've been goofing off and playing card games and working out of my children's book, and in the process we've covered the key patterns for identification for 8 core plant families that applies to more than 45,000 different species of plants that you could encounter anywhere in the world. We've also looked at the differences between monocots and dicots. And really we've covered most of the essential material from the tutorial of Botany in a Day that you need to be able to key out and identify new plants. So that's what we'll do now, is we'll start with a flower that doesn't match any of the patterns we already know, and we'll key it out to find out what it is. Now, given that it is winter here in Montana and we don't have much for flowers outside, we're going to work with a flower from my photo library and run it through the keys to identify it down to its proper family. The first step in the process is to determine, is this a monocot or a dicot? Now you may recall that monocot plants tend to have parallel veins in the leaves and typically flower parts in threes, whereas dicots tend to have net veined leaves and flower parts in fours or fives. So do you think this is a monocot or a dicot? That's not too tough. That's a dicot. Now if you look real close at this flower, you can see that there are 4 reddish sepals, 4 pink petals, there's 8 stamens, and recall that's the male part of the flower, and then the pistil, the female part of the flower, is at the center, and it has a distinctive 4-lobed stigma, the stigma being the tip of the pistil. So 4 sepals, 4 petals, 8 stamens, and a pistil with a 4-lobed stigma. Let's remember those characteristics, and we'll take a look at the key. Now there are a great many different dicot flowers in the world, and in Botany in a Day they are divided into several different keys based on whether or not they are regular or irregular flowers, and also by the number of petals. So let's page through the keys and find the right key for our flower. First, we have a key to regular dicot flowers with numerous petals. Now, numerous means 11 or more. So does that fit our flower? No. And then we have a key to irregular dicot flowers. Now, you may recall that that flowers that are symmetrical, like say a mustard flower, those are regular flowers, whereas those that are asymmetrical, like a pea flower, those are irregular flowers. So is our sample regular or irregular? It is a regular flower, so it won't be in this key. We also have a key to regular dicot flowers with 0, 3, or 6 petals. Does that fit? No. And here we have a key to regular dicot flowers with 4 petals. That sounds about right. And we also have a key to regular dicot flowers with 5 petals. So let's stick with the key to the dicots with 4 petals, and we'll go through it and see if we can find a match. So looking at our key, the first section is for shrubs or trees. And is our flower a shrub or a tree? No, here we have an herb. So we go down to the next section, herbs with distinctive vegetative features. And so first item, forest plants without chlorophyll. If it didn't have chlorophyll, it wouldn't be green, so it must have chlorophyll. Okay. Moving along, we have aquatic plants with finely divided leaves underwater, but whole leaves above the water. Does that fit? No, not an aquatic plant. Neither is it a vining plant, and it is not, in the fourth item here, bristly, hairy, or sticky. So we continue on down the page. We have the next section, herbs that have flowers with 4 united petals. Does that fit? No, our petals are clearly separate from each other. So we go down to the last section, herbs that have flowers with 4 separate petals. Going through these items, our first one is leaves opposite, and does ours have opposite or alternate leaves? It may be a little hard to see in the photo, but these are alternate leaves. So we'll skip that one. The next one is leaves opposite or whorled. We'll skip that one. And then we go down to leaves opposite or alternate. Now we do have alternate leaves. So it says succulent. Succulent would mean that the leaves are kind of thick and fleshy. Does that fit? No. 2 sepals, does that fit? Definitely not. So we continue on down to the next item. Leaves opposite or alternate. Again, succulent. 4 sepals, 4 petals, 1 or 2 times as many stamens, and 3 or more pistils. Does that fit? No, our plant is not succulent, and it has only 1 pistil. Moving on down, we have leaves opposite, alternate, or basal. 4 sepals and 4 petals, 4 or 8 stamens, often a 4-parted stigma. Does that sound familiar? You bet it does. That would be the evening primrose family. Now it's good practice to go through the rest of these and to look to see if there's anything else that might match that we want to compare and make sure that we have the right one. But for our purposes, this sounds good, so we'll turn to the evening primrose family and read about that. So here we have the evening primrose family. The delicate flowers of this family have mostly regular, bisexual flowers with 4 separate petals, 4 separate sepals, sometimes colored like petals, and 4 separate petals. There are an equal number or twice as many stamens as petals. It has a compound pistil with styles fused together, but not the stigma lobes. Note the distinctive 4-parted stigma in the illustration, an essential pattern for recognizing this family. And if we look towards the lower right side of the page of color pictures, you'll see that our specimen is shown there and that our plant is a fireweed. Looking through my photo library, I see a number of other flowers that have this same pattern with 4 sepals, 4 petals, 4 or 8 stamens, and a pistil with a 4-parted stigma. Those include evening primrose, hairy evening primrose, scarlet bee blossom, and clarkia. Now, many of these flowers are illustrated in Botany in a Day. However, any that are not are easy to look up in any other book that is organized by families. Once you know the family pattern, once you've been able to identify a plant to the family, then you can turn to just that family in whatever book that you're working in and flip through the pages to find a match to your particular specimen. And that is a super easy way to identify plants. Okay, well that wraps it up for me. We've covered the key patterns for identification for 8 core families of plants. And we've introduced the evening primrose family and the mallow family. We've also looked at the differences between monocots and dicots, and we've walked through the steps of keying out a new and unknown flower through the keys in Botany in a day. From here it's up to you. You have all the skills that you need to take Botany in a day out and identify flowers in your area. For more information on the book, on Botany in a Day, or Chanlé's Quest and card game, be sure to visit our website at www.hopspress.com. We also have a photo gallery with hundreds of different wildflowers organized by families to aid in your identification.